Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of State of Mind. This will be Part 28, Chapter 18, the second half. When they finally got up, the three of them headed to Izuku's apartment complex. This was the first time Hisashi and Shota were seeing it, and they were both relatively apprehensive when they walked up the steps and into the actual apartment. The apartment smelled musty from the lack of anyone living in it for some time, which was the first thing either of the couple noticed. The second thing they noticed was the damaged couch and the lack of any decorations or other furniture, really. The entirety of the apartment seemed like a model, like no one had ever actually lived there. Bare walls, empty rooms, and soundless air. It was a sad place, and the couple couldn't help the dismal look they shared with each other. A hand waving between them had both of them looking back to see Izuku holding his phone up for them to see. "I'm going to go speak to the manager. She knows me. I'll be right back," Izuku's messy green handwriting on the black background said. Shota eyed the kid worriedly, and Izuku shook his head, sliding his finger up on the phone to show more writing. "I'll be fine." Hisashi snorted, amused by the little listener's foresight to add that little note at the bottom. "All right, little listener, we'll get started gathering things you might want to keep." Izuku waved a hand dismissively, as if there was nothing that he actually wanted to keep, which was sad. With Izuku now gone, the two heroes found a couple boxes and went through the rooms, searching for things that could be considered important to a teenager. They really did find surprisingly little. "He said he lived here his entire life, right?" Hisashi asked, his voice laced with uncertainty from the living room. "Yeah," Shota answered, grimacing as he checked the mostly empty cabinets, fridge, and drawers in the kitchen. There were few utensils, plates, and bowls, really mostly enough for only one person. The only thing there was an abundance of in the kitchen was coffee, and Shota found himself thinking mood at that, and then wrinkled his nose. He picked up too many things from his students. "Finished." Hisashi joined him in the living room. "Me too." Shota sighed. Both of their boxes barely had anything in them. "Should we do his bedroom? He still isn't back yet, and his appointment is getting closer." Hisashi lifted a brow, stepping out of the kitchen to peer down the hallway. "Let's just get it done. I have a feeling his bedroom is going to be even more depressing than the rest of the apartment." Shota sighed and pushed past his husband to walk down the hallway. With a deep breath, he pushed open the blank door and stepped inside of the room. He was right. It was fucking bleak. Izuku's bed was stripped bare, and all the blankets were in the corner, stapled to the wall to form some kind of canopied nook. When Shota bent down to look into the small area, he found more blankets spread on the ground and several pillows against the back. A pile of books rested against the wall. Some of them appeared to have fallen onto the blankets and were scattered about. The entire cranny looked cozy and comfortable, and honestly Shota felt bad that they hadn't thought of making something like that for the kid in their own apartment. Behind him, Hisashi gasped at the sight of the room, and Shota stood. Aside from the corner and the unused bed, there was almost nothing in the bedroom. There was a small desk beside the bed, and a pile of notebooks next to the nook. But aside from that, nothing. Shota grabbed the notebooks and the books from inside the nook and placed them in his box, before taking down the blankets and folding all of them, piling them in and on the box. Hisashi cleaned out the drawers, frowning when it was mostly old, empty pill bottles. And with the bedroom being the last room to be finished, the entire apartment was empty of anything that could possibly be meaningful, and the couple stood there with two, not even completely full boxes. "Let's take these back to the car." Shota heaved a breath and Hisashi nodded, moving toward the door, before freezing, his entire body tensing. "What's wrong?" Shota asked deeply, stepping to the side to see what his husband was staring at. A grunt was startled out of him when he caught sight of the grooves in the wood by the door jamb. 4 of them, pushed deep into the wood, worn in, as if someone had been pulled through against their will, fighting. Many, many years ago. Sho. Hisashi swallowed heavily. I see it, Shota answered. That was a bad day, Izuku said, with a shaky and disused voice, and both the heroes looked up in surprise at the sound. Izuku had moved quietly and caught them both staring at the fingernail grooves in the wood. They weren't used to him speaking again. He rarely did it. And usually when he did, it was only to apologize for something he didn't need to be apologizing for. Izuku's hands were shoved into his pockets, and he was looking at the ground with a haunted look in his viridian eyes. Hisashi cleared his throat. We got what we could see, but you can go through the rooms again if you... Izuku shook his head, frowning deeply. Trust you, he said, clearing his throat, and walking back down the hallway and out the front door. Hisashi and Shota glanced at each other and followed, stepping to the side as Izuku shut the door to the apartment, filled with so many bad memories for the last time. And with that, they headed to Izuku's psychiatrist appointment. Sunday morning, Izuku and his guardians arrived at the new dorms before everyone else. Izuku wore a new, bright yellow, of course, backpack that was specially built to carry cats and had a dome built into the back of it. The top flap was currently open, though, and Wink was poking her head out at the top of it, looking around curiously at Izuku's new room. The day prior, Izuku had mentioned to his psychiatrist how much Wink helped him and how he was worried about being away from her, and the psychiatrist had simply written a note, adding her to his list of medicine as an emotional support animal, and when he'd shown the note to Nezu, he had added on hero assistant. Izuku had been incredibly touched by even that small thing his psychiatrist, guardians, and principal had done to make his life even a little bit easier. Izuku walked into his new dorm room, his guardians behind him, as he immediately froze in surprise. There was no bed, but his attention was immediately drawn to a huge nook that was constructed in the corner, taking up at least a quarter of the dorm room. A large rainbow-colored canopy hung from the ceiling and spread out to catch in hooks on the walls that could be taken down at will. A huge pillow-type cushion decorated the bottom of it with multiple pillows shoved inside of the cranny it created. Holy shit, Izuku murmured, eyes huge in shock. Hisashi grinned from behind him. Oh, wait till you see this, he said before reaching up to flick off the lights. The big windows to the balcony went opaque to block out all the light, and a hologram immediately appeared, startling Izuku back, and he bumped into Shota, who steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. The hologram or projector or whatever it was erupted into life to fill the darkness with brilliant hues of specks of light. Stars, Izuku realized with a gasp, as he reached out to touch one, his hand going right through it. It was Nezu's idea, Hisashi grinned. We knew you don't like the dark, and we mentioned it to the principal, and he recommended using the holograms that we use for the entrance exam letters. Power Loader reprogrammed one for you to show the night sky. This is actual video footage of the night sky above Musutafu, with a few added effects and lights, of course. Izuku's knees gave out, and Shota grunted in surprise, grabbing him and lowering him to the ground. Wink jumped out of the bag to settle around Izuku's shoulders, rubbing against his face as he looked around the room, lit up in muted hues of purple, blue, yellow, green. Tears pricked at his eyes as he caught sight of familiar constellations spiraling around his room, as if the room itself was space. A bright light flared in the corner, near where his 2 boxes of things had been piled, drawing his attention. And a hand shot up to cover his mouth, as a choked gasp escaped it. It's a nova, kid, Shota whispered, and Izuku looked up at him, the tears spilling out now. That was Shota's idea. Hisashi's grin only grew as the lights of thousands of stars danced over him. Izuku made a gurgling noise for a moment before lowering his hand. Fuck. Shit. Shota snorted. I take it you like the room, then? Izuku nodded, rapidly, more tears squeezing out of the corners of his eyes. The corner of Shota's mouth lifted in a crooked half-smile, and he lifted a hand to nuzzle Izuku's fluffy hair. "We wanted to make your room as comfortable as possible," Hisashi explained, flicking the light back on, the windows becoming transparent again, and the hologram shutting off. "But even with all this, if you ever need anything, please come to our rooms. The teachers' rooms are in the next hallway over, and mine and Sho's is closest to yours. Come any time, and if neither of us are there, call us." "We're serious," Shota added, meeting Izuku's eyes with his own dark orbs. "Never hesitate to get a hold of one of us. Do you understand?" Izuku nodded again, more slowly this time. "Wink, of course, can stay in the room with you. She is yours now, little listener. She has been yours for a long time." Wink chirped happily from Izuku's shoulder and stood, leaning against the back of his head happily. Izuku lifted his hand, signing one of the few things Hisashi had taught him in the hospital. "Thank you." Hisashi grinned and signed back. "You're welcome. We'll give you some time to get your bearings. The rest of the students should begin arriving soon. Shinso and Todoroki are on either side of your room. We thought you seemed closest to the both of them," Shota explained, standing up and moving to leave through the door, hesitating with one hand against the doorknob. "Remember to keep what we said in mind, okay?" Izuku nodded, and then with a sigh, the two teachers left Izuku alone for the first time since he'd been rescued. From his spot on the floor, Izuku lifted Wink from his shoulders and hugged her against his chest. "Thank you," he murmured to her, and to all the people that had helped him get to this point that couldn't hear him. His doctors, his psychiatrist, his guardians, and other teachers, Yagi, Nezu, the other students. There were so many people that had helped Izuku get to where he was now. He straightened his shoulders and looked into Wink's eye resolutely. He needed to be better. He needed to try harder. He wanted to be better. For them. For everyone. For the hero he was going to become. Izuku would fight this affliction in his mind. He would fight. Izuku stood after a minute of sitting on the floor, and he removed the backpack from his shoulders. He didn't need it at the moment. He knew Wink wouldn't leave him. He placed her back on his shoulders, and she laid down, back legs trailing down his right shoulder and across his collarbone. Her head held high on his left shoulder, and her paws crossed pristinely, almost buried in his yellow scarf. She looked proud of herself. Once he was sure she was settled, Izuku headed downstairs to the common room, moving toward the front window where he could see Aizawa lecturing the class, apparently about going after him. Izuku was glad that he'd asked the teacher not to expel them all. After that, Izuku was surprised to hear Aizawa clear his throat and then go on in his droning voice. "Nova is already inside. If I hear anyone pestering him about things he doesn't want to speak about, you will be expelled." He looked directly at Kachan, who scoffed and looked away. Izuku felt bad for causing this conversation to be had in the first place, for being so weak. "Now, we're going inside. Let's see some energy." Izuku breathed in a gasp of mirth. Energy? Really? After that? The students' auras were all dark after that. Oh wait, they were coming in. Izuku scrambled back away from the window to stand by the couch, fingers tugging on his scarf nervously. He didn't need the scarf now. There were just too many scars for him to be bothered covering up anymore. And besides, after everything he'd gone through, he found that he just didn't care about hiding them. There were much worse things for him to be afraid of than his classmates seeing his menagerie of scars. The large wooden doors opened up and Aizawa stepped to the side as the group of students rushed into the common room, some of them exclaiming when they caught sight of Izuku standing there anxiously. He was dressed in his summer uniform, bright blue sleeves underneath a yellow scarf wrapped several times around his neck. "Midoriya!" Ashido yelled, rushing forward. "I'm so glad you're back!" Izuku flinched, stepping back rapidly and tripping on his own feet, Wink meowed loudly as Aizawa's capture scarf shot forward, grasping his wrist and waist to steady him. Wink grumbled to herself as she settled back down. What did I say? His guardian growled at his classmates. It's okay, Izuku quickly signed, forgetting for a moment about the fact that he was using his hand and not speaking. Aizawa looked at him doubtfully. Sorry, Midoriya, Ashido yelled, eyes wide. Izuku winced and shrugged. Wait, is that a cat? That is Nova's emotional support and hero assistant, Wink. You will treat her with respect. Aizawa sighed, and the students gave a shout of yes, sir, before the teacher released Izuku and went on to explain the layout of the dorms. When he finally finished, he leaned against the wall and rubbed his eyes. That is all. Dismissed, he said and left, heading to his and Mike's room tiredly. The students were silent for a second, but surprisingly, Koda was the first to step forward, his eyes excited. Izuku was confused for a moment before remembering the boy's quirk, and he reached back to take Wink from his shoulders. She whined, annoyed, but Izuku handed her to Koda, who whispered to her, and she immediately settled into his arms, keeping one eye trained on Izuku, but still happy with Koda. After that, the rest of the students were more comfortable to speak. Kirishima walked forward to take Koda's place as the boy walked to the couch with Wink. Kirishima bowed low to Izuku, who blinked in surprise. I am so sorry for the pain we caused you when Bakugo and I visited. Izuku winced at his words and waved his hands, brow creased as he glanced up at Kacchan, who refused to look at him. Shoto joined him a second later, bowing low as well. And I am sorry that I couldn't do more to help you. We were there, and yet did nothing to help. His friend's voice was stiff, self-deprecating. Izuku shook his head, frown deepening. Then Ida joined, next to Shoto. I am sorry as well, Ida said. Yaoyorozu joined then, bowing. Izuku's face was twisting, as if in pain, and he was waving his hands, trying to get them to stand back up. He tried to speak, but his words seemed to get caught in his chest, and all he could manage was a rough hum in the back of his throat. The bowing student straightened, and Shoto eyed Izuku worriedly. Are you nonverbal? Izuku nodded, lips thin. What do you mean? Ida asked Shoto, pushing his glasses up on his nose. Shoto looked at Ida wearily. Izuku has been having trouble speaking. He can write things down, though. Please don't speak about him as if he's not here. Izuku relaxed slightly and sent Shoto a gratified look. Ida nodded stiffly. I apologize, Midoriya. Izuku shook his head, trying to convey that it was fine. Are you all right? Shoto asked, sidling up to his side. Izuku hesitated and then nodded. Wink left Koda's arms then, leaping to the back of the couch and jumping into Izuku's arms. He hugged her, breathing a sigh of relief before she climbed back up onto his shoulders. So, Shinso walked forward, hands in his pockets. You named your one-eyed cat Wink? Izuku shook his head. Previous owners. Shinso raised a brow, and Izuku nodded, his hand absently holding onto Wink's tail as the others approached. Let's not hound Midoriya, Ida exclaimed, hand slicing through the air to smack against his palm. We must begin setting up our rooms so that we can all get a good night's sleep before class starts back up tomorrow. Izuku tensed at the mention of a good night's sleep, something neither Shinso nor Shoto missed. Izuku hadn't had a good night's sleep in a long time, and he was honestly worried about sleeping in the new room without either Aizawa or Mike near him at all times. He was worried he would activate his quirks and hurt something or even someone during a nightmare. I think we're next to your room, right? Shinso asked, and Izuku nodded. Seeing where Shinso was going with that line of thought, Shoto nodded. Since we are so close, you can grab one of us very quickly if you need anything. Yeah, Shinso added, and then grimaced, when he looked down at Izuku, seeing his watering eyes. "Oh, geesh," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck uncomfortably. Izuku would never get used to people being kind and worrying about him. He couldn't help the tears. Izuku looked away, sliding Wink down to cuddle her against his chest as the trio began walking toward the stairs, not bothering with the elevator since they were on the second floor, and everyone else was currently using it. They climbed the steps in a tense but comfortable silence after that. "You were here already, Izuku. Did you get settled into your room?" Shoto asked. Izuku shrugged, petting behind Wink's ears while she purred loudly. "I noticed Aizawa calls you Nova, and most of the students don't call you Midoriya," Shinso voiced, filling the silence. "Would you rather I not call you Midoriya?" Izuku glanced up at Shinso through his hair and nodded, raising one finger. "First name?" Shinso asked, and Izuku nodded. "Okay, Izuku." Izuku nodded as they reached their rooms, stopping in front of his door. "Let us know if you need anything," Shinso said, and then walked into his own bedroom. Shoto glanced down at Izuku, blinking. He stared at him for a moment. Izuku met his mismatched eyes nervously. "Yeah, make sure to let us know." He swallowed and headed into his bedroom on Izuku's other side. Izuku blinked after Shoto, now worried about his friend. He sighed after a moment and went into his room to quickly change his clothes into something more comfortable. He liked his room and everything, but he wasn't ready to be alone in it, so he headed back downstairs to wait on everyone to finish with their rooms. There was a TV in the common room that Izuku switched on while he waited, letting the news play while he played with Wink on the floor with some of the cat toys that he picked out for her. Soon enough, Kirishima was the first to finish, walking down to stand beside Izuku. "That was exhausting," Kirishima exclaimed loudly before sticking out a hand to help Izuku up from his place on the floor with Wink. Izuku knew that's all it was, but he still flinched back away from the proffered hand. Kirishima's face fell, and he dropped his hand. "Sorry," Izuku rasped. Kirishima crouched, frowning. "Why are you sorry? It's not your fault that you don't feel safe." Izuku froze, eyes widening, breath catching. What? What did... No one had said that to him before. Kirishima smiled again and very slowly lifted a hand, palm up, allowing Izuku to take it if he wanted, but also to ignore it if he wanted without it being weird or awkward. Izuku took the hand and Kirishima pulled him up. Wink twined around Kirishima's ankles and the red-haired boy looked down at her happily. "Can I pick her up?" he asked, and Izuku nodded. He bent down and lifted her, cradling her against his chest and stroking her back. "She's so soft!" Kirishima yelled, and Izuku nodded rapidly. She was. Wink was like fluffy velvet. The rest of the class began trailing down after that, all of them in various states of exhaustion. Ashido ended up proposing the idea of looking at everyone's rooms in a sort of room presentation contest, which made Izuku tense with anxiety. He followed behind the group as they reached his room, his hands varying between tugging at his scarf, pulling at the hem of the skeleton astronaut shirt, and petting Wink, who rested across his shoulders once again. He stepped forward to open the door, and then moved to the side so everyone could see what they wanted to see. "You have nothing on your walls?" Ashido yelled, as if it personally hurt her. "Do you not like decorating?" Yaoyorozu asked, tapping her bottom lip. "Dude, why don't you have a bed?" Kirishima asked. Izuku pointed to the nook in the corner of the room with a shrug. "Oh, that's awesome," he added, looking at it with excited eyes. Izuku pulled at his shirt nervously, and Yaoyorozu narrowed her eyes at him, seemingly zeroing in on his shirt. "You like that shirt, don't you?" she asked, and Izuku looked down at it. "It's a new one," Shoto said flatly. "He bled all over his other one, so I got him this one. I think he likes that design." Yayorozu made a thoughtful hum before they moved on, but not before Kaminari reached in to shut off the light, successfully activating the new space nightlight. Izuku grimaced as everyone in the room looked around themselves in awe. From his shoulder, Wink reached up to bat at a star. "Wow, this is awesome!" Uraraka said, staring all about her, lights of stars dancing across her skin. "Is that a freaking nova?" Kirishima practically screamed, staring into the corner, and Izuku nodded hesitantly. "That is so manly." His voice dropped to a whisper as he watched it unfold, eyes shining with awe. "Well, let's keep going," Ashido grinned, and Izuku nodded. After that, they went room to room, and Izuku found that Shoji also didn't have any decorations. Though he said it was because he didn't like having a lot of things, which Izuku thought seemed unrealistic. No one had so few things unless there were extenuating circumstances. He didn't actually know Shoji that well, though. Their only time together really had been during before the... "Izuku," Shoto's voice asked, and Izuku looked up, blinking. Shoto stood in front of him, one hand on Izuku's arm. "Sorry," Izuku whispered. He must have done something to concern his friend. "Want to head back to your room?" Shoto asked, and Izuku nodded, breathing a sigh of relief. His classmates were a lot all at once, and he was just tired. He didn't want to finish looking at everyone's rooms. His energy to be around people had disappeared some time ago. Shoto let everyone know they were heading to bed, and despite Ashido's complaints, Shoto guided them back down to Izuku's room. Izuku sighed and waved to his friend before going into his own room. He left the light off and nightlight on, and climbed into his nook. Wink jumped off of him and used her litter box on the other side of the room, ate her dinner, and then came back to snuggle with him in the nook. It was actually quite comfortable. So much more than his old nook. Plus he had Wink, which made it immensely better. He was grateful for everything he had now. And with that thought, Izuku closed his eyes, curled up in a ball in his nook, and went to sleep, telling himself that he wasn't afraid anymore, despite the monsters he knew were waiting on him on the other side of his consciousness. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 18 of State of Mind. Chapter 19 will be up next. Let me know those thoughts and reactions in the comments below, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.